All right. Today I'm going to share with you what I have called, for now, the ultimate system. Now, ultimate system is a name, it's a work in progress. But you'll understand why I've called it the ultimate system as we go through this. So, far too little acknowledgement is given to Dr. Town's background as a systems engineer. He made the balance method so clear, so systematic, and so easy to learn and apply, and he was able to do this because of his systems background. Now, there is literally a systems concept called the immediate effect, or the diagram of immediate effect. To many, the slogan instant results may seem like both the balance method's claim to fame and a marketing ploy. And while instant results is indeed those things, to a systems engineer, it's just a rewording of immediate effects. The systems concept of immediate effects is used to explicitly and precisely describe certain system processes where a change in one part of a system directly affects the state of another part, such as how needling shou tai yin, if we have shou tai yin here, okay, and we needle it, and how that directly affects zhu tai yin. Okay, so a change in shou tai yin equals a change in zhu tai yin. And this is what's known as a direct effect or an immediate effect because they are directly connected to one another. Now, there are various types of immediate effect relationships where when you change one part of a system, then it immediately or directly changes another part of the system. And in the balance method, we can break it down into either physical connections or resonant connections. And we'll also have to talk about a hybrid connection. Okay. So, physical connections are those connections where you have meridians that are physically connected to one another, directly connected. So, for instance, we have, that's system 1, okay, where we have meridians that are directly connected to one another. System 3, where meridians are directly connected to one another. And system 5, where meridians are directly connected to one another. And we also have resonant connections. Okay, and so resonant connections are systems where because you have two parts that are in resonance, so they have let's say a similar frequency, okay, when you change one frequency, then the other frequency changes, okay? And so those would be systems 2 and systems 4, okay? In systems 1, 3, and 5, because we have an object, a meridian, that is directly linked to another object, another meridian, then when we do anything to one meridian, okay, then the other meridian also gets affected, okay? So there's an effect on the other meridian. Whereas in resonant connections, the meridians are not directly connected with one another, but because they have the same frequency or because they are linked through harmony or resonance in some shared way, then when you change one, then the other one changes as well. Okay. Now, we also have a hybrid connection. hybrid connection, and that is a connection where you essentially have a meridian that is connecting back into itself. And in this case, of course, we do have a direct physical connection. Okay, of course, it's the meridian itself. But then the meridian has its own particular resonance or frequency, and when you change that frequency, then of course the meridian frequency will change as well, and so it also has a resonant connection. And so this is system 6. Okay. So systems 1 through 6 all follow this diagram of immediate effects. We have a part of a system, right, we'll call it A, and it is directly linked to another part of a system, call it B, okay, and this implies that we have an immediate effect because they are directly linked in some way, and a change in A creates a direct or immediate change in B. Okay, and so we have an immediate effect. Okay, and of course, as we know, in balance method, it's a little bit more complex, where we have a part, right, of the system which has immediate effects on different parts simultaneously. Okay, like so. Okay, and so what we ended up having actually is system 1, system 2, system 3, system 4, system 5, and of course system 6. Okay, and so by needling one meridian, we have an immediate effect on 5 other meridians plus the meridian itself, and those are direct immediate effects. Now, there's also this concept of ultimate effects. And ultimate effects is the system's concept of the cascade or final reaction. A main feature of the ultimate effect is that it is not necessarily immediate or instant, although it can be quite quick. Another main feature is that in complex systems, the ultimate effect is often the result of many parts working together to achieve it. So consider the switch or light bulb analogy that's so often used by balanced method practitioners and was used by Dr. Tan himself. While usually interpreted as an explanation of the distal effect, as we have this light switch which is on the wall, right, and we have a light bulb which is in the ceiling, okay, and when you flick the switch, then the light bulb, right, turns on, and this is supposed to represent, right, the distal effect, right? But it also is descriptive of the immediate effect. The switch and the light have a direct connection to one another. And so when we flick the switch, the light bulb changes instantly. And so there's this immediate effect, right? And this is often what we call instant results, just like flicking a switch, right, and turning a light bulb on or off. Now, let's consider an outdoor patio light on an evening with lots of bugs. The state of the light has a direct effect on the concentration of bugs around the light. If we have a light and it is off and we have maybe a couple of little bugs flying around, right? But then when the light is on, then what ends up happening is that it attracts a whole bunch of bugs, right? We've got bugs flying all around the light, okay? And so We can therefore say that the diagram of immediate effects is we have the light and we have bug concentration. Okay, and so the state of the light, whether it's on or it's off, directly affects bug concentration. When it's off, right, not many bugs. When it's on, lots of bugs. So the state of the light directly affects bug concentration. And that would be the immediate effect. Okay? It immediately affects the bug concentration. But what about the switch? How does the switch affect the concentration of bugs? So we have a switch which can be on or off, and it is directly connected to a light which can be on or off, and that light, right, if it's on or off, directly determines how many bugs there are, right? Okay, so if it's off or if it's on, right, we have a few bugs or we have lots of bugs. Okay, and if we were to write it out, we would say we have the switch and we have the light and we have bug concentration. Okay, so the light and the switch have a direct connection. Okay, and so this is an immediate or a direct result, a direct effect, immediate effect. The state of the switch determines the state of the light immediately. But then we also have a direct connection between the light and the bug concentration. The state of the light immediately affects the state of the bugs. Okay? But what about this connection? Okay? What's this called? Okay? It is not called an immediate effect, at least not in systems engineering, because the state of the switch is not directly linked to the bug concentration. Okay, so there are steps that are taken in between, namely the switch connects to the light and then the light affects the bugs. So this is not an immediate effect. Okay, but it's obvious that the switch affects bug concentration, right? And so in systems engineering, this is actually called the ultimate effect, okay? Meaning that the switch ultimately affects the bug concentration. So it's not a direct connection, it's not an immediate effect, but it's an ultimate effect. Now, what does that mean for the balance method? Well, when we have a meridian, let's call it the balancing meridian, okay, and when we have a sick meridian, okay, they have, as we know, a direct connection, and this is the immediate effect. So when we have change in the balancing meridian, for instance, through either needling, okay, or moxa, or bloodletting, whatever it is that a person is doing, they are changing the balancing meridian, which in turn is creating a change in the sick meridian. Okay, so change in the balancing meridian causes change in the sick meridian. Okay, now what we often don't consider is that the sick meridian, okay, has connections to other meridians, okay? Just like any meridian in the system, right, has connections through system 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or of course 6. Okay, so we know that the balancing meridian, there was a change, and it created a change in the sick meridian. So a change created a change, a direct change. Now, what happens when the sick meridian changes? What happens to the meridians that it is connected to? Well, when there is change occurring in the sick meridian, then that must mean that there is change occurring in all of the other meridians as well. Okay? The very simple act of the sick meridian changing has an effect on all of its connecting meridians. Okay? And so, therefore, although this is it's an immediate change, okay? When we are looking at it from the balancing meridian perspective, okay, so here we have the balancing meridian, right? And here we have the sick meridian, and we have a direct connection, so we have an immediate effect. We have, when change occurs here, it automatically means that change occurs here. But then the sick meridian, as we talked about, is connected to other meridians. And there's a direct connection there. And so when there's change in the sick meridian, there will be change in the other meridians. And although this is an immediate effect from the perspective of the sick meridian, from the perspective of the balancing meridian, this is an ultimate effect. Okay, there is no question that changing the balancing meridian through treatment, through needling, will have an effect on meridians beyond the sick meridian. Okay? In other words, meridians that the sick meridian connects to. But it won't be an immediate effect, or won't be a direct effect. It will be an ultimate effect. Now, we also know that the balancing meridian, let's use the left lung meridian as an example, okay, has immediate effects on a bunch of different meridians at the same time through system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so left lung, of course, would have an effect on right spleen. It would have an effect on bilateral UB. It would have an effect on right large intestine, bilateral UB a second time, as well as right liver, and then, of course, bilateral lung. Okay? And these are the direct effects. Okay? It directly affects each of these simultaneously. When we change the left lung meridian, all of these meridians change immediately. Instant results, right? Or the instant effect. Okay? But then, when you think about it, now that we have changed, for instance, the right spleen meridian, right? We've needled the left lung meridian, and it has created a change in the right spleen meridian, and now the right spleen meridian ends up actually changing the meridians that it is connected to. And what we can do is we can list it like this. Okay? Where we have the right spleen, which would affect, of course, the left lung. The right spleen would affect bilateral small intestine. It would affect left stomach. It would affect bilateral senjiao. It would affect left heart. And of course, it would affect bilateral spleen. Okay. Now the UB would have the same thing, 5 systems. Now, what's interesting here is because both the UB meridians are affected bilateral, then all of the meridian systems that it connects to will be bilaterally affected. So it will affect bilateral small intestine, bilateral lung, bilateral kidney, bilateral lung, bilateral small intestine, and of course bilateral UB itself. The right large intestine, being directly affected by lung, will change when you needle lung, but it will then of course affect the left stomach, the bilateral liver, the left lung, the bilateral kidney, the left stomach again, and finally the bilateral large intestine or itself. Bilateral UB actually happens again, where we have bilateral small intestine, bilateral lung, bilateral kidney, bilateral lung, bilateral small intestine, and bilateral UB. Now, when we needle the left lung, the right liver is changed, and so when it changes, it causes changes in the left pericardium, the bilateral large intestine, the left gallbladder, the bilateral small intestine, the left lung, and finally the bilateral liver. And then of course lung has a resonant effect with itself, so of course it will immediately affect itself. It is being changed, of course, but the right lung is also changed, and so both lung meridians are changed bilaterally, and because it is a bilateral change, everything that the lung touches is therefore also affected bilaterally. So we have bilateral spleen, bilateral UB, bilateral large intestine, bilateral UB, bilateral liver, and finally bilateral lung. So this matrix represents not only the direct effects of systems 1 through 6, the immediate effects, but it also represents the secondary or the ultimate effects that occur when the meridian being affected by the needled meridian is changed, and then how that change then affects all of the other meridians. Now, there's something about the ultimate effect, which is different from the immediate effect that we want to make clear. When a meridian is being affected directly by the needled meridian, that is clearly an immediate effect. It is not considered an ultimate effect. So, for instance, we can cross out or cancel out all of the meridians that belong to this initial group up here, because they are all being affected immediately. So left lung we can get rid of, okay? We can also get rid of the, let's see here, well, because we're affecting the bilateral lung in system 6, we can get rid of bilateral lung, which means we can get rid of all of the instances of lung being affected secondarily. Okay. The urinary bladder is also immediately affected bilaterally, so we can get rid of any examples of the urinary bladder being affected. So here we can get rid of it here, we can get rid of it here, we can get rid of it here, we can get rid of it here. Here we have another bilateral lung which we can get rid of. Here we have a bilateral lung which we can get rid of. Okay. And then we also want to see, do we have anything else that we can get rid of? Well, there's right large intestine, which does not appear anywhere. Well, it appears half here. So here, right, all we have is the left large intestine, which receives an ultimate effect. The right large intestine does not, because it is already part of the system. Likewise with the spleen, okay, we also only are having a ultimate effect on the left spleen, because the right spleen is already receiving a direct effect. Okay. The same is true for bilateral large intestine here. So left large intestine receives the ultimate effect, and here as well we just have left large intestine, and here we just have left spleen, and I think that's it for large intestine and spleen. Yeah. Now liver, the right liver meridian has an immediate effect placed upon it by needling. The left liver meridian, however, does not. So all of the bilateral livers, then it is only the left liver that we are interested in. Left liver and left liver. And is that all of them? I believe it is. Okay. So now what we're left with is only those meridians that are affected by the balanced meridians, not the balancing meridians, but by the balanced meridians. Okay, so when this changes, right, then all of these, they change, and when those change, then all of these change here afterwards. And what we can now start to see is that there is one meridian in particular, or shall we say two meridians if we're talking left and right, but there's one meridian in particular that is greatly overrepresented in this matrix. And that is, I'm going to change colors for this, that is the small intestine. The small intestine here is ultimately affected once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times in total. okay, compared with any other meridian. For instance, the kidney meridian is affected once, twice. I think that is it. Yeah, just twice. Okay, 3 times. No, 3 times. Sorry. Okay, the stomach meridian is affected once, twice, 3 times. Okay. The left liver meridian is affected once, twice, 3 times as well. Okay. The large intestine meridian, the left large intestine meridian, is affected once, twice, and 3 times. Okay. Sanjiao is only affected once bilaterally. Heart is only affected once unilaterally. Okay. Spleen is only affected twice. Okay. Compared to the small intestine, all of the other meridians are not affected much at all. But the small intestine meridian has 6 examples of being affected from one change in the left lung meridian. We place one needle here, and the small intestine is ultimately affected 6 different ways. So what we have then is we have the lung meridian, which has an effect on the bilateral small intestine meridian, and this is an ultimate effect. An ultimate effect. Okay? And the same is true for any of the other meridians. There is a meridian which is ultimately affected, 1 or 2 meridians are ultimately affected much more significantly than all of the other meridians. So for instance, when we look at the large intestine meridian, and the way in which this is ordered is actually 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it'll be the same for all of the other examples that I'm going to paste, right? After having eliminated all of the meridians that are already immediately affected, okay, then we're left with meridians that are ultimately affected, and within that grouping, we notice that pericardium is more significantly affected than any of the other meridians. So we can say that the large intestine, right, has an ultimate effect on the pericardium meridian. For the stomach meridian, after having eliminated all of the meridians that have an immediate effect, okay, then what we're left with is an ultimate effect, which is, interestingly, evenly balanced between bilateral liver 4 times and bilateral kidney 4 times. So we can say that the stomach meridian has an ultimate effect on both kidney and liver. When we look at the spleen, we notice that the spleen also has an equally ultimate effect on the UB meridian 4 times, and also the gallbladder meridian 4 times. So we can say that the spleen has an ultimate effect on UB and on GB. When we look at the heart meridian, we see that the heart meridian has a significantly larger effect, ultimate effect, on Sanjiao, bilateral Sanjiao, 6 times total compared to any other meridian. So therefore the heart has an ultimate effect, a significant ultimate effect on bilateral Sanjiao. Now, the small intestine, we already know through inference what the balancing or what the ultimately affected meridian is going to be. And that is because lung ultimately affects bilateral small intestine. And if we notice here, small intestine majorly, or the majority of ultimate effects are bilateral lung. So small intestine has an ultimate effect on bilateral lung. Now, for UB, we already know that spleen has an ultimate effect on bilateral UB, and we see that here, spleen appearing 4 times, right? However, we also notice that UB has a bilateral ultimate effect on liver 4 times. So UB has an ultimate effect on spleen and on liver. Now, for kidney, we notice that kidney has a significant effect on bilateral gallbladder, but also a significant effect on bilateral stomach. So therefore we say that kidney has an ultimate effect on bilateral gallbladder and bilateral stomach. Now, for pericardium, we notice that the majority of ultimate effects occur to the bilateral large intestine. So we can say that PC ultimately affects bilateral large intestine. And for the Sanjiao meridian, we already know that heart has an ultimate effect on Sanjiao, and as you might have guessed, I missed that one there, right? As you might have guessed, Sanjiao ultimately affects bilateral heart. Now, the gallbladder has, as we know, a connection with spleen, because spleen ultimately affects gallbladder. And we also know that it has a relationship with kidney, because kidney ultimately affects gallbladder. And sure enough, bladder and kidney are the ultimate effects of gallbladder. Gallbladder ultimately affects bilateral spleen and bilateral kidney. And finally, the liver. We see that the liver ultimately affects the stomach quite strongly, and it ultimately affects the urinary bladder meridian quite strongly as well. So liver ultimately affects bilateral stomach and bilateral UB. So the full diagram of ultimate effects would therefore be lung has an ultimate effect on bilateral small intestine. Large intestine has a bilateral effect, ultimate effect on bilateral PC. Stomach has an ultimate effect on bilateral kidney and on bilateral liver. Spleen has an ultimate effect on bilateral UB and bilateral GB. Heart has an ultimate effect on Sanjiao. Small intestine has an ultimate effect on lung. UB has an ultimate effect on spleen, but also on liver. shrink this a little bit. Kidney has an ultimate effect on stomach, but also on GB. PC has an ultimate effect on large intestine. Sanjiao has an ultimate effect on heart. Okay. Gallbladder has an ultimate effect on spleen and also on kidney. And liver has an ultimate effect on UB as well as stomach. Okay, and in the system of ultimate effects, okay, what we're looking at is the meridians which are most strongly affected. Okay, because all of the meridians are affected eventually, but which ones are most strongly affected? And one of the conclusions we can come up with, as we'll notice, is that all of these are bilateral. Okay, it is the bilateral which are, so the system of ultimate effects is a bilateral system. Okay, so it's always bilateral. Okay. And so this is very interesting because it actually can be used to explain a lot more of the classical TCM indications for meridians and for points. Okay, for instance, needling lung, right, to treat sore throat. Okay, sore throat or goiter. Okay, very interesting. Needling the spleen, right, to treat urinary incontinence. Okay, or to treat gallstones. Okay, needling the kidney, okay, to treat the appetite. Okay, or to treat deficiency headaches, right? Okay, and the list goes on and on. I mean, you can continue. You're needling small intestine to treat, for instance, asthma, or to treat coughing up blood, right? So, I mean, the further you go, the more you see that these connections are being used. And what's very interesting as well is that a lot of these uses are of a tonification type as opposed to a dispersion type. And that is in part because of the nature of the stimulation. But I'll save that for another time. However, this is the system of ultimate effects. Lung balances bilateral small intestine. Large intestine balances bilateral PC. Stomach balances bilateral kidney and bilateral liver. Spleen balances bilateral UB and bilateral GB. Heart balances bilateral Sanjiao. Small intestine balances bilateral lung. UB balances bilateral spleen and bilateral liver. Kidney balances bilateral stomach and bilateral gallbladder. PC balances bilateral large intestine. Sanjiao balances bilateral heart. Gallbladder balances bilateral spleen and bilateral kidney. And liver balances bilateral UB and bilateral stomach. And we've shown how that happens and why that happens. So that's it. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Talk to you later.